Welcome to episode 434 of That Triathlon Show, the podcast presented by scientifictriathlon.com. I'm your host Michael, and on today's episode I interview Dirk Friel. Dirk is the co-founder of TrainingPeaks, and he comes on the show to discuss the past, present, and future of the training platform that I'm sure the majority of listeners here are very familiar with. But before we get into that interview, big thanks to our sponsors, Precision Fuel and Hydration. They create carbohydrate and electrolyte products that are effective, practical, and tasty. And they are recently announced as the official hydration partner of the 2024 Ironman and Ironman 7.3 European Series races. This includes the Ironman World Championships in Nice. And athletes that have questions about nailing their race nutrition strategy at these races can book a free video consultation with the athlete support team or use the free race hydration and nutrition planner on the Precision Fuel and Hydration website, where details about each specific Ironman European Series event has been added and included in the planner. As a listener, you can get 15% off your first order by using the code TTS24 on precisionfuelandhydration.com. And thank you to Senate. The Senate indoor swim trainer allows you to improve your technique, power, and swim training consistency. The great thing about the Senate is that it is so versatile, so you can make it work to suit your swim-specific needs. For a lot of athletes, the primary need may be to work on technique, but others might need more work on the force and power aspect of their stroke. And the Senate allows you to do either or even both at the same time. And they have a great library of video-guided workouts that you can pick and choose from to find the ones that best suit your needs. Try the Senate risk-free for up to 30 days and get 20% off your first order on senateswimtrainer.com/TTS. One final thing before the interview, I'd also like to ask that if you enjoy the podcast, please share it with your friends and help the podcast grow. And if you can leave a 5-star rating and review in Spotify or Apple Podcasts, that would be even better. These things really go a long way to helping the podcast keep growing and ultimately keep it sustainable and keep it coming on a regular basis. Thank you very much for your help with spreading the word if you choose to do so. Now, without any further ado, here's the interview with Dirk Friel. Welcome to That Triathlon Show, Dirk. How are you doing?
Oh, awesome. Hey, thanks for having me on. I've been a long-time listener, so certainly an honor to be invited on. Thanks so much.
Yeah, it's great to have you. I don't often have people from, let's say, from the industry on the podcast, but outside of actual sponsors. But I think TrainingPeaks is such an essential part almost of many athletes' day-to-day experience. So that I want to make this exception actually that when the opportunity came up. So let's start with, can you introduce yourself to the audience and tell us a bit more about yourself?
Yeah, I live in Boulder, Colorado, which is kind of a nice spot to be in with you when you are involved in endurance sports. I grew up in Colorado. I loved cycling. I dabbled in triathlon when I was very young in the 1980s. And I just stuck with the bike, loved it. Graduated from high school and I literally got a one-way ticket to Belgium when I was 19. Just because I was just chasing the dream and that was the only way to do it back then. So it took off to Belgium. I was there for 5 years. I was 3 years amateur, turned pro in Belgium. I was pro for 12 years. Parallel with that was my father, Joe Friel, having written many books, the Triathlete's Training Bible, Cyclist Training Bible, Fast After 50, and many more. So endurance was definitely in our family DNA, and I learned a lot from my father and his coaching practice. And then towards the end of my coaching career, around towards the end of my athletic career, I retired in 2001. So in 97, I started coaching along with my father. And then that kind of led into TrainingPeaks, and that's a little bit about me. I have a wife and daughter, and my daughter is studying in London. And that's a little bit about me.
And sounds like, based on our pre-interview chat, you do some ski touring. And what else are you up to these days in terms of keeping yourself entertained?
Yeah, when I retired from pro cycling and definitely focused on the family and our daughter, being born, and there was definitely a few years there where I hardly did any training, but it was just cycling, and I didn't get to ski a lot through my cycling career because it just became a 12-month-a-year, process. And living in Colorado, it's such a big part of our culture here. And I loved skiing as a kid. I wanted to get back into that. But then I'm an endurance athlete at heart. And then I discovered skimo and ski mountaineering and touring. And so, the race scene started to pick up. So I've been racing now for, I don't know, 12 or 13 years in the skimo scene. So yeah, we have a local mountain I can train on 30 minutes up the canyon from Boulder. I do a lot of the races. And it's the uphill running, kind of endurance endorphins. And then you have that crazy downhill mountain biking, if you will, gonzo downhill kind of vibe. So I love that. And there's team events, which is a whole new realm of racing, with a teammate. So I do that pretty much 6 months a year. And then 6 months a year, I race bikes, and I primarily race mountain and gravel. Now that gravel's really picked up, I've always done gravel. Now it's actually like labeled as gravel, but we always just rode, 23C tires on dirt roads around here. So I love getting up in the mountains and exploring, whether it's on, a bike or skis. So yeah, that kind of keeps me going.
Yeah, no, that sounds amazing. I don't know much about skimo, but I know that it's going to be an Olympic sport in the next,
Yeah.
I believe. So that's exciting. Is it common for people that do skimo as a hobby? Do they have coaches, like cyclists and triathletes have coaches? Is that a thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm proud to say a lot of the top European, racers use TrainingPeaks. They definitely have coaches. The top echelon absolutely have coaches. That's where coaching starts, is always at the pinnacle and the peak and the Olympic level. And then it kind of trickles down from there. So we're definitely seeing growth in skimo coaches. And there's companies in even the United States that only coach, trail runners, as well as skimo athletes. So it's definitely an absolutely growing area within endurance sports for sure.
Yeah, interesting. So let's get into TrainingPeaks. What is the genesis of TrainingPeaks? How did it come to be, and what was your involvement with that?
Yeah. Well, I certainly never embarked on creating a software company. There was no business plan. There was no private equity. There was no venture capital. Even to this day, we've been bootstrapped. So the way it started was, as I mentioned, in the late 90s, I started coaching with my father, and that was the family business. But we were relying literally on the fax machine and email attachments. Certainly there was no app back then in the 1990s. So I just, saw just how horrible data management was, with literally like pieces of paper being spit out the fax machine every Sunday night, with the, your athletes' training logs coming back for the week, and you're already a week behind. If you got those training logs at all. And then you would fax back next week's training program or email attach some spreadsheet. And then in the late 90s, obviously more and more athletes, we wanted all of our athletes to have a heart rate monitor. Pretty much everybody had Polar. So you had a .hrm file, and that was being emailed to me. So if I had 15 athletes, I had 15 emails minimum a day with 15 .hrm files attached to them. And I would have to open up the Polar software and import that data in to analyze it. But then we started to have athletes with power taps and SRM power meters. So now you had a .csv file type, you had a .srm file type. Before you knew it, you had 6 different file types and 7 different desktop platforms open. So it became so horrible to try and manage. So obviously the .com era was picking up, the late 90s. So I envisioned, let's go to the web. Let's try and create a web-based data management planning, system that at first was just for our own coaching needs. So we could basically deliver a better quality service, to our athletes. So that was literally why we started it, was to become more efficient and to have a better system of managing the data. So I pitched that idea to my dad. Obviously, it was a fine idea, but neither of us were developers or programmers. But lo and behold, luckily enough, the best man at my wedding, teammate, still best friend, Gear Fisher, was a web developer. He had a daytime job, and I convinced him to help us. And so we would just stay up late at night, developing this outside of our day jobs, if you will. And literally there was no business plan. There was no money behind it. It was just organically grown. So that's the genesis of how it started.
And at what point did you realize that, okay, you can open it up for other coaches to then become customers and use the same platform? When did that happen?
Well, literally in the year 2000, we were developing it in 1999, leveraging it in 2000. But Boulder and Northern Colorado was a hotbed of this new career path of coaching. There weren't very many coaches, but we knew all of them. Like, we knew every single coach. And so we literally just kind of went to our friends who were coaches and said, hey, would you try this? Would you give us feedback? They liked it. They saw benefits in it. So we saw opportunity to open it up, and to create, all of a sudden we had a different revenue stream within our coaching business. And that was a software line item. And so then towards the end of 2000, we decided, hey, maybe these are two separate entities. So we separated them, and then we had a software business and a coaching business, but we still had no funding. Again, it was just bootstrapped is how we call it. So we saw opportunity, but I was still coaching. It probably took 3 years until we went full time on TrainingPeaks. But our philosophy was, if $1 came in, we would reinvest 80 cents and we would keep 20 cents for ourselves. So I still have the picture today of when we gave our first distribution checks to myself, Gear, and my father. And it was the leftover. It was the 20 cents left over from the dollars, we took in. And that's what we leveraged to pay ourselves. Until, enough was flowing in that we took the risk and the dive, and we went 100%. And Gear left his day job, and we went full bore, around 2003, let's say 2002.
And what have been some of the other important big milestones that have taken place since then?
I would say big milestones really happened in the marketplace itself of endurance training, endurance coaching. I mean, certainly coaching itself, having a coaching business as a for-profit business is, less than 25 years old. It's a very young profession. Back then, most endurance coaches were employed by universities or teams, national governing bodies. There were very few that were doing it full time, and charging their athletes. So that has dramatically changed. Obviously, now there's hundreds of thousands of coaches, building businesses out there, which has been an amazing, trend and growth. I would say device adoption of devices. At first, even when we worked with our very first Tour de France cycling teams, they were resistant to downloading the data. They all had SRMs, but in the year 2005, an SRM was a status symbol. And if you had an SRM, it's kind of like you made it, but you didn't know what to do with it. And we had to convince Tour de France professionals, to save their data. And then you had to convince them, no, there's this thing called the internet. You can upload it into our system. And then from there, they were still resistant. Why? Because somebody on the other end would look at their data and be accountable, right? And so it was a totally different culture. So obviously, device adoption was another big one. And I'd say, the mobile revolution, back then, obviously nobody was leveraging their cell phones to look at their peak performances that they did today. So that's happening, it's flawless now. It just, you hit stop on your Wahoo, Garmin, Polar, whatever it is, and you could go to 10 different websites within 5 seconds. So that's been a major, I get, you said milestone, but I think more in terms of industry trends.
Yeah. That's actually segueing into the next question a little bit, but also related to the competitive landscape. So, at what point did you have competitors start to come up? Because from my knowledge, at least, you were kind of the first to do what you did. So when did you start having competitors, and then how has that, or did it influence how you operated or how you innovated?
What's really funny is when we started TrainingPeaks, we were competing with the incumbent, and the incumbent back then was PC Coach. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of that, but if you had a Polar software device, PC Coach is kind of what you use, and they actually had a coach interface. But since then, then they probably went out of business in 2004 or something like that. I'd say there still are, there's a good number, a handful of folks out there. And I guess it was kind of void maybe until 2005 or so. And then you started to see some, competitors pick up. So I guess, ever since then, that's a good thing. If you're in any industry that's worthwhile, there's going to be competition. So that's good. It's a growing market. So there's more and more opportunity, obviously, and more startups see that opportunity. So I guess since 2005, there's been competition.
And is that something that has influenced how you operate or how you innovate? Have you, for example, at points seen that, this company is having this cool feature in their software and we need to get on that? Or how have you approached this changing competitive landscape?
I mean, yes and no. I think primarily first you have to listen to your customer, and that's what should drive what you build much, much more so than competition. I really believe you have to, believe in what you're building for your customer much more so than trying to react to competition. So trying to stay focused is number one. So there's been trends within the industry that you have to stay up with, and competitors will certainly maybe come out with things before you do, but that's not our driving force, is to be first. So yeah, I would say it's not that high of a priority. It never really has been in our DNA to be competitive per se. It's more about, we like, I guess, managing our own, I guess, pathway, if you will, and kind of taking care of business internally before we think about like reacting to competition.
Yeah, I like that answer. And speaking of customers, so you mentioned how you started with just your friends, other coaches in Boulder.
Yeah.
But now you have two big customer groups, both athletes and coaches are customers. So can you explain a little bit more how you look at these two groups in terms of your value proposition with TrainingPeaks and how that maybe has changed as well over time, with now having many athletes that are not coached, but they are still using your software?
Yeah, definitely. We certainly kind of cater to the coach, if you will. We're expert instruction first is how I would maybe state it. We believe in deliberate practice. So we believe if you should set a goal, you should seek out expert instruction, you do focused practice, and you get immediate feedback. And that's kind of how we view our software development. Which one of those quadrants are we solving for? And they have different manifestations depending if you're a coach or an athlete. So on the coach side, in terms of, large part of their day-to-day is planning. So how can we make planning more efficient for coaches, whether they're coaching 3 people or 500 people, right? We have solutions for both. They have to then analyze. So they're informed that the workout was completed. So they can turn on, a post-workout notification. So if you're paying, a higher dollar amount for your coach, they may have turned on their end post-workout notifications, so that right when you hit stop on your Garmin, they get a notification 5 seconds later, and they can actually see the overview of your workout. Even if they're in the dentist office, they can be in the waiting, room of their dentist office. They get a pop-up notification. Aha, John just finished their workout. Let me see how it went. Some quick overview of it, and they can respond right then quickly as if they want within post-workout comments of like, hey, great job, looks good, or you went too hard in interval number 2, right? Let's talk tonight. So I think a lot of how it manifests is different, but there's maybe a lot more development on the coach side because they are a business running a business. And so a lot of what we develop, the athlete never even sees, but it makes the life of the coach much better. And actually, that's why we started the company. So from day one until today, we do the very same thing. We help coaches build businesses and deliver better quality service to their athletes. On the athlete side, certainly they want to know that there's accountability going on, that, there's that communication thread, post-workout comments with their coach. They're getting notifications as well the night before of, tomorrow's workout. They could put in, availability, hey, coach, they can go into next week's training calendar and put in Wednesday that they can't train, or they're going on vacation, and this is the amount of availability they have and what sport they can do on vacation. So a lot revolves around that communication and data management side of things for both coach and athlete.
Yeah, no, that's a great overview, and it's funny because I don't know exactly how many years I've been using TrainingPeaks, but I've never thought of it until now that there are actually a lot of things that you have built for coaches to really make the workflow so or that are really catering to coaches, as you said, and making the experience as a coach and as a coached athlete really seamless in that way. Even those small things like the athlete getting the notification the night before about the next day's workouts, those small things, that just clicked for me right now, how all of those small things flow together quite
and I think the majority of the coach's time is spent on the web app, and the majority of the athlete's time is spent on the mobile app.
Yeah.
So hence, to manage resources, you tend to develop on the mobile app more for the athlete and that UI UX interaction to make it easily accessible for the athlete to put in comments or daily metrics, my sleep quality last night, for example. Whereas a coach is going to find the mobile app to be harder to plan in, harder to analyze in some respects, in others it's better. But the majority of the time the coach is spending, in the web app. And so we kind of tend to spend more time on the web development towards the coach solutions.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that probably answers one of the listener questions we have as well later on. So can you give an overview of the demographics in terms of the different sports that are using your platform? So cyclists, triathletes, running, and athletes and coaches, respectively, of course, within those different sports.
No, it's definitely, it's interesting because it's certainly changed over time. When we started out, we were triathlon led. Triathletes in the mid 2000s were very much on the cutting edge because there was no tradition. The first Olympic triathlon, this is the year 2000. And so there wasn't a lot of tradition within triathlon, and triathletes really adopted coaching. They were 10 times more likely than a cyclist to hire a coach. So I would say early on, we were very heavy on triathlon and then cycling second. And we were probably 70% triathlon, through the first 8 years of existence. Now it's great because that I guess the penetration of the coaching aspect has penetrated many more sports. More sports and athletes are seeing the value of expert instruction and coaching. So I'd say now we're even across, more or less even across cycling, triathlon, and running. And so you might say a quarter each, and then somewhere around the last 25% I would call other. But that other is actually the fastest growing segment of our demographics. It's amazing all the different sports now we're getting into TrainingPeaks organically. We have, for example, 4 of the America's Cup yachts, American Magic, I believe Israel, Italy, and the UK teams are all on TrainingPeaks. They used to do the sails and the, by hand, and now they pedal within the yachts. They actually pedal and they train as cyclists. So yeah, we have Olympic sailing teams, rowing teams, alpinists, a lot of folks training for Mount Everest, et cetera, turn to TrainingPeaks and coaches to try and get them better prepared for these big objectives. So it's really kind of exciting to see a lot of new sports kind of come to TrainingPeaks, that they're not new sports in themselves, but they're discovering the scientific or evidence-based way of training and structured training.
Yeah. And what about in terms of geographical distribution? Do you see, is it very US? And I know that's not the case because I'm in Europe and I know how many Europeans are using TrainingPeaks. Can you describe a bit what the geographical distribution looks like?
Yeah. I don't know. We probably have more non-North Americans than North Americans, or it might be 50-50, right? So it's obviously very, very global. Very big. And I'd say in recent times, like we've had really big growth in South America and Spanish speaking nations. That's been really adopted well. So yeah, we're very international and we're not US centric.
Yeah. So there are a few things here, and I'm reading from my list because this is a long, dense question. There are some things that you keep hearing in the ether or at the water cooler that are, let's say, complaints around the platform or requests for improvements. So I want to ask about a few of them. So one here is, this is one, and I have requested listener questions as well. So some of them are kind of falling into listener questions. So we might then skip those listener questions. But one is that you are seen as being a bit slow to implement features or metrics or changes.
Well, yeah, it's funny because, like I said, we develop a lot for the coach. Definitely happy to announce we sent out an email yesterday, I believe, about our new strength capability coming out. So we've been working very hard on bringing strength training solution to TrainingPeaks. And we did a survey within our user base, and we found that more than 90% of coaches prescribe strength, and more than 70% of athletes have strength on their calendar. So look for that to come very soon. Within weeks, in June, we'll have out our beta strength training solutions. And I guess like another one is like in nutrition. We work with every Tour de France cycling team, and nutrition is such a big part of what they have to manage and kind of like make improvements upon now, and they're leveraging apps themselves. So we recently released syncing with Hexus, Food Coach, and Fuel In. So again, like in these two examples, we're primarily listening to our coaches and what coaches are asking for. TrainingPeaks, you have to remember, is, first of all, we're very holistic. We look at the athlete not just in terms of like the intervals you did today, but the nutrition, the sleep, and yet we're very agnostic. So we're compatible with so many different devices and training methodologies that I think a lot of the innovation, if you will, has been seen on the coach side. And unfortunately, athletes may not always see that, especially if they're not coached, right? They're not going to see any of it. And I don't know, I think that's probably the biggest thing is just being, listening to our coaches and kind of adapting to what they're listening to. And I'd say another one that athletes don't see any innovation in is on the business side. We now integrate with CRMs, so customer relation management tools for larger groups. So we've created now that we've productized that where coaches can now interface with their CRM so they can better track their marketing funnel, for example, for training plan sales or any coach services from their website, et cetera. So yeah, a lot's been happening on that side of things. And then that trickles down to the athlete experience.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I'd add on this is as well that I don't think it's always or I actually think it's often not the best thing to be the very super early on the early adopter curve. So you have this classic illustration of the early adopters. I can't remember the exact terms, but let's say middle adopters and late adopters. And when you're an early adopter, then you're inevitably going to take up a lot of things that then end up not really being a big thing or a useful thing at all. So I don't even know.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's that we definitely want adoption before we're going to set aside a good amount of resources against it. So as new devices come out, it tends to be they reach out to us. And more so, this used to not be the case, but now via our API, they're pulling data from TrainingPeaks. So they can make their app, their device, their metrics better by knowing what you did today and what you're planning to do tomorrow. Now, Super Sapiens went out of business. So how much resources should we have put into Super Sapiens, blood glucose monitors? They leveraged our API, they pulled data from us, but we didn't fully embed it per se, right? Unfortunately, they did go out of business, but we need, these new devices to kind of get some amount of traction. And then we have to have, demand from our customer base, coach and athletes, to then justify the resources behind it. But oftentimes we will be working with that new device via API, and they will be pulling data from us, and we'll be working behind the scenes to try and see case studies or how things are working out. And then secondarily, we have the WKO, and that tends to be a sandbox where you can plop in new data metrics and actually graph and chart all kinds of things in there that are not within TrainingPeaks at all. So a lot of times, early adopters will leverage WKO to kind of play around with new devices and metrics.
Yeah, Super Sapiens was the example I had in my head. I wasn't sure if I was going to mention it or not. But yeah, there are many examples, of course. But that's a perfect example of, okay, something comes out with a big bang, and there's a lot of talk about it. But then a few years later, nobody's really using it anymore, and then it ends up going out of business. And clearly, for all the promise in the early days of this new metric can revolutionize endurance performance, that didn't really seem to happen. And actually, I think the same way as a coach, because there's always so much continuing education that you can do. And I'm not going to, and I did it in the early days. I remember I spent so much time with running power meters to try to figure out if it was useful. And in the end, I'm not saying that they're not useful, but it wasn't time well spent compared to where I could have spent the time on more basic things that would have been, just higher leverage, more useful in every single in every single way, basically. And I basically think that early adoption is generally not the best solution in my opinion, but everybody is different, and that's why we have different levels of adoption, early and late.
I think it's great we need to be exploring, and as coaches, it's science and understanding and metrics and wearables are ever evolving. It's never going to stop. So having said what I said, I still want to improve. We need to become better at adopting new metrics and new devices. So that's certainly a challenge for us that we're putting resources into to become more adaptable, if you will. Because that's never going to end. Like, I love innovation. I love new stuff coming down the pike, and I love exploring and experimenting, with new stuff. And I have all kinds of super sapiens patches here now because I dabbled in it. But yeah, that's fun. It's fun stuff as well. But you got to be cautious and know what you're working with.
Yeah, and get some kind of validation as well before things are fully implemented.
Yeah,
Before that, they can be implemented in a sandbox mode, as you say. And
I also, another trend in the industry is certainly, API, right? So I think we're kind of like a chameleon. We work with hundreds of different partners via API, and we're never going to bring into TrainingPeaks 100% of what they offer. I always tell new device manufacturers, like, you need to have a very good solution out of the box software wise, whether, that's going to be web right now, web or mobile, because you can go all the way through and be very, very deep with all of that data, much more so than what we will do. I see us as bringing in a lot of the summary data from new metrics, being able to plot some of the data, but you still are going to get more out of the manufacturer's own software in these new technologies. That's not really all the case in terms of like a Garmin power meter, but in these new devices that are coming out, they sort of have to prove it out really deep within their own software offering first. And then we'll see what's worth pulling into TrainingPeaks to help the coach out. But oftentimes, the coach actually does need to open up another app if they want to go a lot deeper with that data set.
Yeah. So another criticism is that the platform has been slow recently. This is also a listener question from @empiricalcycling. And I would add, from my personal experience, that WKO for certain analysis is rather clunky and slow. So is this something that is let's say a known thing that's being worked on? I actually know that for the main platform it is being worked on because I've had some interactions about that.
Yeah. No, we definitely went through a time period this winter where we had growing pains for sure. We had slow loading, especially on the calendar. It was primarily for larger coaching businesses outside the United States. So that became priority number one. We obviously have staff on call 24/7, and that became even more of a priority in terms of alerts going off. So just like with an athlete, that was a moment to learn from, and I think we're faster and better and stronger now. I mean, I've had feedback that they've never seen it faster before. So unfortunately, like anything, it's a phase within business of growth. Seeing the weak link too late and apologizing for that and being open about it, and then figuring out the solution and coming out the other end even stronger. So I hope, and knock on wood, that I have heard that we're faster now, and we definitely saw the reasons behind that lag or loading, those slow loading times. So absolutely take full ownership for that. We were open with our customer base and we were on it, and we have scheduled downtimes, and a lot of times it's to try and prevent some of that stuff, to try and get on top of it. So no matter what app you use, when you see scheduled downtimes, you should maybe be thankful for it and actually, allow for that, so that things can improve and get better. WKO, I'm not sure, that's not web based, that's desktop. So a lot has to do with your machine you're running it on, how many athletes you have. If you're syncing, I mean, I have 150 something athletes and 10 years worth of data. And so when I change machines and I sync WKO, I literally have to walk away for like half a day. But it's not our first priority either. I'm afraid.
Yeah. No, I get that. The final, let's say, criticism that I have on my list here is the training stress score and derived metrics, and
Yeah.
not the metrics themselves, but maybe that they are quite prominent. And sometimes I think that actually for me, this is my only criticism as a coach, because I think that for some athletes it becomes an issue when they see their CTL go down. They are getting faster, but they think that they are getting slower because the self-confidence is so tied to the CTL, and that is probably my main issue that I have with TrainingPeaks.
Yeah, it started out as an awesome trend, and it still is. Like, to see the trends, it's like stepping back and looking at the last 6 months or last year, the last 12 months, and to spot those trends. But then at some point it became like athletes became misinformed, whereby they thought chasing CTL is the holy grail. And like, we've never published anything or said you should increase your CTL as high as possible. So I think that is where definitely the value of the coach comes in, much like chasing hours. Just because you went 13, 14, 15, 20, 25, 28, should I do a 40-hour week? Like, that just does not make sense, And so it's the same as CTL. You should not chase CTL. And as you alluded to, in fact, you need to lose, if you will, CTL in order to perform and peak. But I hear you in terms of like how it's positioned, maybe within the product, and that's something to bring back to the team. But it's certainly been more about the trends over time and tracking that. And if anything, like, try to get them honing in on the ATL, your fatigue level, so that acute training load. And, as the CTL goes up, that ATL is going to rise 10 times faster, so showing them the end result of it. So, but I certainly hear you. I see that, but it's primarily coming from athletes that just aren't informed, and building in them, I guess, the confidence to know that just like with hours, if you do a 30-hour week, you're probably going to crack. So let's stick to 12-hour weeks, just like with CTL. If you get to 150, that's Tour de France level. That's not what we're aiming for. You know what I mean? And, or if you're, triathlon, that's pro level Ironman, hey, we need to stick to 85. We know you get sick and injured when you get above 85 CTL or negative 35 TSB. Like, that's our sweet spot. You know what I mean? And it's all about individualization, and not enough athletes understand that they are always comparing themselves to others. They compare themselves with HRV. Like, an athlete will feel bad that their HRV is lower than their buddies. Like, but that has no relevance at all. You know what I mean? So I think it's about the individualization and getting that across and showing them their sweet spot and what the goal is. But I hear you in terms of people faith in it.
It is a good answer, though, because it comes back to you being catering to athletes that are coached and to the coaches, and then it becomes a question of individualization, but also education. And when an athlete has a coach, the coach is able to then give them that education. It's maybe more of an issue for the self-coached athlete that doesn't necessarily have the experience to understand the limitations of that model.
I might mention that's maybe the downside of dumbing things down. If you see CTL associated with fitness, well, that's not really the case. It's more about workload, which does have a direct effect in terms of like building fitness, but to a certain degree, and then you have diminishing returns. So it's not the whole story. It's not just like higher CTL, higher fitness. Like, no, that's not really the case. But to try and get athletes to maybe understand the concepts better, it can be expressed as fitness. but it really should be expressed as chronic training load, which is what it is, and
Yeah.
it's a combination of your duration and your intensity together. But it's not the holy grail. It's a really nice way to review how things are going and maybe set some targets going forward. And as you go into year 2 of data collection, those numbers become infinitely more powerful because now you can see the trends. You can see where you performed well, where you got sick and injured, where you retired, and did they relate at all, to the performance management chart. And then from there, you can set goals going forward. So again, the value of a coach, just that education piece is so, so important.
Yeah. So, what is the future of Training Peaks going to look like? What do you have in the pipeline? You mentioned the strength training, which is, by the way, a super exciting thing, and I'm looking forward to that already. But what else is coming up? Not just in the near future. Maybe you don't have to share your entire development pipeline, but in general, in terms of trends in the marketplace and things that are coming up. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned API. We're definitely putting resources into expanding API capabilities. Again, like more of these devices, they want different aspects of the data set, which are not currently exposed within the API. So being able to offer more solutions with that API integration. We definitely filter our API partners. We don't just allow anybody to just grab and leverage our API keys. There's a lengthy review process, but that also allows us to better understand what's coming. And then that we can work that into our development process. So, I'm looking forward to, leveraging our API more, with the partners. So that trend of being open and agnostic has definitely won out. Early on, Polar and Suunto betted the reverse that, they wanted a closed system, and that certainly has not been the case over the years, as Garmin has shown and led the way. So API expansion, we're definitely going to be doing a lot more on the business solutions side for coaches to helping them run their business more efficiently. So that has nothing to do with fitness. It has nothing to do with what intervals you did today, but it really, really helps coaches run their businesses and expand and help athletes. And the end result is we're here to help the athlete. I mean, via human coaching first. So even though we work on business solutions, at the end of the day, it helps athletes achieve their goal. I think communications.
If I can spend less time on the admin side of things, then I can spend more time working with my athletes. So it's a win-win-win.
Yeah, exactly. So communications, I see opportunities to make our communications between coach and athlete better, more robust, flexible, dynamic. I think there's a whole lot more we could do there around coach-athlete communications. And I think we're just at the beginning of nutrition. As I mentioned, we're now compatible just very recently, within a month, with, Hexus and Food Coach and Fuel In. And again, Visma, Lisa Bike Tour de France team leverages Food Coach, and other teams leverage Fuel In and Hexus. And I think we're learning a lot from in that example, the Tour de France teams, and even on triathlon, but more so in cycling, because they hire staff within the teams, but they have a field of experts that are employed by the team. You have a sports psychologist, physical therapist, physio, you might say, strength coach, nutrition coach. I had a team contact me this week. They now have a sleep specialist, and the sleep specialist now needs a TrainingPeaks coach account to work with, certain athletes to help them improve their sleep hygiene, etc. So I really love this trend of, you can have the head coach in the middle. They should know holistically what's happening with the athlete, but they shouldn't be afraid to bring in an expert in a different field to help that athlete out where that coach is not the expert. So nutrition wise. So now we have athletes that are shared with 5-6 different coaches per se, right? And they're working with each expert when necessary, and they can all work as a team and communicate together. So these experts will get together within meetings where the athlete isn't involved, but they're working behind the scenes on behalf of the athlete. So I see this trend of having multiple experts, working with athletes, building, and you'll start seeing more of that within coaching businesses. Not that a coaching business may have all these folks on staff, but they may have their preferred vendors, their preferred experts that they work with, and they can then share that athlete for the next 2 months, let's say, with a registered dietitian to get expert advice on working out their nutrition needs. And now with our strength training, we now have athletes being shared to strength coaches because the head coach may not be the expert in strength or mobility or yoga. So it's really cool that we're launching with a library of 1,000 strength videos, which include mobility, but coaches will also be able to upload their own video. So they can leverage their own video, and the video can be 15 minutes long or 30 seconds long, but that's all embedded. And the athlete goes to the gym or their yoga or whatever it may be and just opens up their mobile app and they can view, what was prescribed. So again, I see these themes that we're working on around nutrition. I see a theme around strength, mobility, prehab, injury prevention being a big theme to build. And this is our first iteration, which you'll see in June. Sounds like you may already be in it now. Communications is another theme, and I'd say API expansion is another theme.
Communications, what does that entail? So you already have obviously the post-workout comments, but does that potentially mean an ongoing general chat between the coach and the athlete, or is that something you can talk about?
I mean, I personally, for example, when I review an athlete file, I might go in and they may not have hit the lap button, but I want to highlight something, or it's a race. And I want to see for the first quarter of the race, what was their variability index in that triathlon? I'll highlight it. And then on the right side in the web app, I can actually annotate. And it's highlighted, and then I can type, first 50 minutes of the race, you went out too hard. Like I can actually annotate there. But the athlete is not notified of that, right?
Yeah.
But it's great value. So now I annotate in the workout file, and I might go through, and it's like reading a book. Like I can analyze the race file, and and they can learn from it. It's a learning experience, but I have to notify that athlete in the post-workout comments to go look at my comments in the race file itself. So I think that could be tightened up. Like there's many, many, many examples of that in where communication can be more efficient, or notes, metrics, commenting against daily metrics, coming in from an athlete, HRV, like there's communications around different items within TrainingPeaks that could flow better and be improved.
Yeah. So we have a lot of listener questions, but one that the most common listener question, I'm not going to attribute this to anyone because there are so many that ask about AI. Can you discuss AI and your thoughts and plans for that?
Yeah. Again, like as I mentioned earlier, we kind of start from the pro and elite and learn from, if you will, the best, and then it trickles down from there. No Ironman champion or Olympic champion or Tour de France team is leveraging AI right now to tell them what to do tomorrow. But that may be coming. It's not there now. Right now, humans are the number one way to train, with human expert instruction. But I believe AI should make that human coach smarter, faster, in the moment, making decisions, analyzing the data. So absolutely, we are investing in AI to learn how it can first benefit the coach, again, which benefits the athlete. but we're not at all being asked by any elite team or coach to use their API. Again, that is going to change at some point, but it's not there now. So having said that, we don't just, change direction and I guess kind of adopt new technologies until it's proven out. But we are investing internally in terms about how to make our data set prepared for that and how to learn from it and to better analyze the data coming in to help the coach make better decisions. Unfortunately, in the marketplace right now, it's a race to the bottom, is what I say, because a lot of AI apps are promising the world and they're the best thing ever for $14 a month, but yet the best don't use it. So that just does not make sense, right? So if you are looking for a very cost-effective, thing to give you a new workout every day that's entertaining, that's a great way to go. I think when you're beginning in a sport, consistency and just getting out the door is the most important thing. An AI app can definitely help you do that and give you some really well-informed feedback afterwards at a more basic level. But then if you are being asked as the athlete to pose the questions, that's kind of a red flag for me because the athlete is not the expert and they don't know what questions to ask. And so oftentimes they go down the wrong rabbit hole. They just think this because they read something. So they're just going down the wrong rabbit hole. And AI isn't the truth. Just because it's giving you an answer does not mean it's the truth or the latest and greatest. So unfortunately, it's kind of a race to the bottom right now, as I mentioned. Another example of if I took an athlete and I cloned them and I had one of them train with only AI and one train with an experienced human coach, absolutely, I would bet on the athlete with a human coach. And so we're in this to help the athlete perform and reach their potential, their true potential. And right now that exists with human coaching. But we need to invest and learn from AI, and it will become a part of TrainingPeaks to help the coach, having said all that. So yeah, it's a long-winded answer, but we're not jumping on the bandwagon right now in terms of like releasing new product because there's a lot that we need to learn first to help the coach leverage AI.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. And I think it's such a buzzword right now, right? And especially for companies looking for venture capital, you almost have to have AI in your right at the top of your business plan. So I think you're in an advantage here, being bootstrapped and not being reliant on that. You can be more free to choose the path that you think is right and best for the athlete.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. A lot of that, kind of buzz is certainly venture capital, driven, grow really fast today. And you have to get as many athletes on board as possible, and that's not the business that we're in. So that's nice that we're not under those demands. But again, AI is here to stay. Don't get me wrong, it's here to stay. I believe in it. We just need to take it, in stride and learn along the way. And it has to be something that is trusted. I mean, I've certainly tried AI apps and not a single one of them after a week have I trusted. It just totally got things wrong, knowing my skill set as a past coach. The other thing is it's not life or death within triathlon. You could spend $14 a month and get AI and it's telling you what to do tomorrow. You could get faster, but it's not life and death. But are you doing self-driving cars today? Are you getting in your car and not driving it and hitting a button and relying on it? No, it's not there because it's not life or death. So if deciding what to do tomorrow in triathlon was life or death, you would not probably use AI today.
Yeah. I think there are some examples where I really think that AI could have a massive positive impact in the not too distant future, which is, for example, let's say I, as a coach, I want to look at an athlete's threshold workouts from the last 3 months on the bike. So let's say I have a chat bot there in my TrainingPeaks window, and it's the AI chatbot, and I'm asking, hey, can you just compile all the data from all the threshold intervals that this athlete has done on the bike in the last 3 months and put them in a nice spreadsheet for me, so I can just compare these workouts and how the development has been going, those sorts of things. Or look at all of the endurance runs, steady endurance runs done in below 20 degrees Celsius, and give me the efficiency factor so I can see if that's coming up.
Yeah.
The case for the heart rate. Those compiling information, compiling data, I think those sorts of things, and doing it quickly and efficiently is where you can probably AI is capable of doing a great job and really saving a lot of time for a coach and assisting the coach.
Absolutely.
In a really good way.
I totally agree. What's really funny is I think those two examples you can do today in WKO, but you have to learn how to write expressions.
Yeah.
So what was my peak 20 minute in any workout where I first performed 2000 kilojoules? Like, you can do that in WKO. It's clunky. It can be much smoother, right? So absolutely, I agree with you. Bringing tools like that within TrainingPeaks would be very valuable, much easier than WKO.
Yeah. So let's move into some listener questions, and a lot of these we've already covered, so we don't have too many to do. But let's see here. This is maybe another one for AI, but Michael asks, are there plans for implementing quote unquote garbage data flagging or filtering?
Yeah, that would have to be first, right? So certainly there will be plans to do that because bad data just makes bad results. So yeah, we definitely are investing in making that improvement.
A lot of these questions are there plans for something or another thing? So, by the way, but the next one is from Chris. Are there plans for more complete syncing with devices, for example, pulling session RPE data from Garmin?
Yeah, that's a API restriction right now from Garmin, I believe. So, I know we've looked into that, but I believe right now that's a restriction somehow on the Garmin side of the API. So I would like to do that. So we'll get there, but we need to work with Garmin.
Sam asks, are there plans to integrate some of Best Bike Splits functionality into TrainingPeaks?
I'd say I believe right now within Best Bike Split, you can create a race plan and export that as a .fit possibly, and import that into TrainingPeaks, which then would sync out to devices. So we have a bit of somewhat of a hack, if you will, but there's certainly some interaction that you can do from Best Bike Split to TrainingPeaks. But again, right now, Best Bike Split is the best thing going in terms of, planning out race strategy. But from there, getting it to your device, you may not need TrainingPeaks. So I'd like to just learn more about what they would like to see in terms of incorporation of Best Bike Split.
I can't speak for Sam, but I think that one thing that would be cool is if you have a race file and you could do the same estimated CDA analysis as you would normally do in Best Bike Split, but you do it in TrainingPeaks. Let's say you have a in addition to the Analyze tab in a workout, you have an Aerodynamics tab, and then you add in some data like weight, those tires, those sorts of things, and then you can do a simple CDA estimation.
I mean, I could see. I certainly don't want to replace Best Bike Split, but if they had an API that we could leverage, we could possibly do that, where we're taking your ride file and sending it to Best Bike Split and returning back CDA. That would be their wheelhouse and where they're experts, and I wouldn't really want to invest in that internally within TrainingPeaks because they're the best. So maybe an API between us would help solve for that.
So is Best Bike Split independent? Because I had the impression that it was also a Peaksware company, but it's not done.
No, it was, and then they purchased themselves back
Okay.
So we're partners, and preferred partners. They're great guys. But yeah, they were within the Peaksware wheelhouse, and then they decided to go back independent, which was, yeah, it worked out really well.
Yeah. Danny asks, and you may have already answered this one, but he asks if there are plans to open up access to the API. So we talked about you have a review and filtering process there,
Yeah.
and I guess that's what you're committed to working with.
Yeah, it's funny because that page says we're not accepting, but yet you can still submit. So obviously people have been submitting. We do get requests, and we will edit that page to say we're accepting. I think the long and short of it is it's pretty, intense, if you will, like review processes. No, it's not just automatically submit and you get accepted. By no means is that the case. It needs to make sense, within our ecosystem. And it tends to be for new, devices and apps, etc., but not really for folks just working in their basements and having fun and playing like a lot of folks do with other APIs. So we're not just a sandbox kind of API to dabble with. So there needs to be a real kind of business use case behind it for us to accept.
Yeah, got it. And I think the rest of the listener questions we have already discussed throughout this conversation. So let's move on to the rapid fire questions. We talked over email about the Olympic distance triathlon or the Olympic picks, and you said that you would just be guessing. So we decided to not use that question for you.
I thought about it.
You thought about it? Okay. So do you have picks for the men's and the women's Olympic triathlon podium?
Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously biased towards Americans. I love that Taylor Knibb just this week qualified for the Olympic road race and time trial. First athlete ever in history to do both. Triathlon, time trial, and possibly road race. She's qualified for all three. So what she can do: the individual triathlon, the mixed relay, the time trial, and the road race.
Yeah,
I don't know the schedule.
I'm not entirely clear if she does the time trial. Does she have to do the road race? Because I thought I read something like that, but I didn't validate that, so I'm not sure.
I believe the selection process in the US is if you win time trial, you're automatically in the road race. And I believe we only have 2 spots.
Yeah, so you have to race basically.
Now, the scheduling is another thing. But I believe if she just does the individual time trial, that would be first. And then 4 days later, I believe, is individual triathlon. And a few days later would be mixed relay. Anyway, so I'm definitely big on Taylor Knibb. She's on Training Peaks. Erin Carson is her strength coach here right down the street from me. She's been in her office, so love her. I also just love the personality of the past champion, Laura Duffy. So hopefully she can come on, and in my book, it'd be awesome if she podiumed. And then, after that, I just have to throw out, Taylor Spivey. I just have to throw out another American name.
Yeah, go for it.
Morgan Pearson just won Yokohama.
Yeah.
Tight race. He had some good speed. I really like Alex Yee, again, past champion, right? No, he was mixed relay.
In the mixed relay.
Yeah.
He
won
second in the individual race.
Yeah. So I really like Alex. Again, I don't know his results, recently. And I've personally met and worked with Christian Blumenfeld and Olaf Alexander Bood. They're on Training Peaks. So I just love that story. I'm not, given recent results, he's not super fast on form there, but I just really like that guy. So got to say, Christian, I'd love the story too for Flora and Christian both getting on the podium 2 Olympics in a row would be pretty cool.
It would be, yeah. No, I think those are great picks. Christian, never counting him out. And I mean, it's not as if he's been performing poorly. He's just not been showing the same form that he did into Tokyo. He hasn't been on the podiums and winning, but he's I wouldn't count him out from potentially just adding a little speed to his run and be pretty close to getting on the podium, if not getting on the podium. So let's see.
Yeah,
it's going to be exciting.
Yeah, it will be for sure. Hopefully they swim in the Seine.
Yeah, let's hope so. But I believe it will happen. They'll find a spot with clean water. Well, thank you so much, Dirk. Is there anything else, any call to actions or anything about TrainingPeaks that you want to mention before we close off this interview?
Yeah, I mean, I just have to say, like, if you're spending time and thousands of dollars on equipment and going to races, you deserve a coach. It doesn't matter how slow or fast you are. It's more about the commitment level than, how you place, because you need to make the time that you're setting aside for training and taking away from family and business and work is worth having that expert instruction, along the way. Doesn't have to be super expensive. You can get consultations, along the way with a coach that you trust, but definitely seek out expert instruction. And oftentimes you can get faster with no improvement in fitness. Like, I see that every day. It could be a bike fit. It could be nutrition. It could be, don't do this workout. Don't do 4 intense workouts a week. I mean, I get invited to 4 different group rides a week. Like, I got to choose, how does that relate to my goals? So yeah, you're deserving of expert instruction and a coach in some form or fashion if you're spending a lot of time, effort, money, and you're serious about it, or you're really focused on it, let's say. So it doesn't matter how fast or slow you are.
Yeah, perfect way to end. I love that. Thank you so much, Dirk. It was great to chat to you, and hope to do it again another time.
Yeah, thanks again for having me on.
I hope that you enjoyed that interview. It was another slightly different interview from the typical training and coaching content that we mostly do around here, but I think that it is highly relevant for a large number of listeners who are using TrainingPeaks or even other training platforms similar to TrainingPeaks to just learn a bit more about the behind the scenes of these products and what goes into developing new features and deciding what to prioritize and so on. I definitely found it really fascinating and learned a ton in this conversation with Dirk. As always, you can find the show notes on scientifictriathlon.com and including some relevant links. And I would point out in particular to check out the TrainingPeaks CoachCast, which is a podcast hosted by Dirk himself, which has a lot of amazing content to dive into with some fantastic guests in the archives, both athletes and coaches. Today I have a pretty easy job promoting our coaching services because Dirk did a great job promoting coaching in general in that interview, or expert instruction as he coined it, which I think is a great term. To get the best results in anything, whether it be professional, academic, or leisure, nobody ever gets to that point without expert instruction or perhaps expert guidance, as depending on the level of the athlete. The help that a coach provides might lean more on the direct instruction side of things or on the guidance side of things, depending on where the athlete sits and where their needs sit on that spectrum. But if you're working with a scientific triathlon coach, you get that expert in your corner to help you on every step of the way towards your goals. And equally important to the expertise and experience that they provide, you get somebody that will be fully invested in your journey and in your athletic success, as all of our coaches are highly motivated individuals that are super passionate about coaching. You can read all about our coaching on scientifictriathlon.com/coaching, and you can email me on michael@scientifictriathlon.com to inquire about availability and to schedule a free discovery call. Finally, big thanks to our sponsors, Precision Fuel Hydration, that you can find on precisionfuelandhydration.com. If you're looking for high quality, practical, and tasty fueling and hydration products, make sure to try Precision Fuel and Hydration. There are a range of options from drink mix to gels to chews, so you can easily find your personal favorite. Don't forget to take 15% off your first order with the code TTS24. And thanks to Zen8, the Zen8 swim trainer is a great tool to have in your toolbox to improve your technique and power, to target specific aspects of your stroke, and to maintain consistency when you don't have time to get to the pool. You can try the Zen8 risk-free for up to 30 days and get 20% off your first order on zen8swimtrainer.com/TTS. Thank you, as always, for listening. Keep training smart and keep loving triathlon.